Hello, my name is Nathan Beardsworth. I'm in cohort C, and I'm placed at Notting Hill Genesis. My research is entitled Taking the Man Out of Management, Exploring Non-Patriarchal Leadership. It's about exploring the effect patriarchy has had on what management is and how organizations can work to dismantle some of this influence. The research is therefore directed at those involved in talent development and senior leadership in an organizational setting. The aim of this research is to construct plans to eliminate patriarchal leadership. So, what is patriarchal leadership? This quote from Bell Hooks encapsulates the reason this research was enacted. If you take this statement as a given, it's clear that management in today's society is going to be extremely unhealthy. Another reason this research was enacted is that there's actually very little research on management from a gender perspective. Much of it comes from the very important angle of why there are very few managers who are women. But there is little in the public attention that asks the question, what is wrong with this concept of management that was created largely by men in the 1800s? So patriarchal leadership can be thought of as a number of different things, but I'd say it's best encapsulated by violent and unemotional leadership. Not showing vulnerability and a lack of emotions are two things brought to light by Richard Wilson in the book Antihero, which outlines why today's leaders are ill-equipped to deal with today's challenges. The book, however, makes very little mention of gender. The key arguments of my research is that patriarchy is deeply embedded in management. So the nature of management in most organizations actually encourages a patriarchal management style, and people with those qualities that are deemed masculine can find their way into management roles more easily. While women are more likely to be in management than in the past, it's still true that women that have more traditionally masculine personality traits are more likely to find their way into management roles. So this quote from James McGregor Burns highlights that leadership as it's currently defined is a false leadership. I'd encourage you to take 30 seconds now to write down or think of your own definition of leadership. Okay, if I can bring you back. So, we define patriarchal leadership as a leadership style in which a leader exhibits and exalts those qualities deemed masculine and hides and devalues those seen feminine. I adapted this definition from a quote by Bell Hooks. So the scale of the issue is large. 70% of senior executives are thought to be alpha male leaders. Women with personality traits more common in men are more likely to be managers, and managerial sex typing, which is where people identify the same traits with management as they do with masculinity, has been identified as a major psychological barrier to women becoming managers in the US. 60% of leaders are likely to have damaged their employees' self-esteem. 1 in 5 people have been bullied by their manager in the UK, and this accounts for 72% of workplace bullying in the UK, bullying by managers. So the methodology of my research, initially it was carried out through empathy walks with 5 graduate trainees working at charities and housing associations. This initial preliminary research served to direct the research to be relevant to the experiences of some of its intended beneficiaries. A subsequent survey was carried out, again aimed at employees of charities and housing associations, which had 50 responses to further ascertain people's experiences with leadership and management. Data analysis was carried out on information about the 50 best-selling books on management of all time, for example, date of publication and whether particular qualities were emphasized in the book. Finally, a more general literature review was carried out on the extensive body of research around leadership, management, and gender in order to get to the roots of the issues brought up in the survey. So, a reminder then that the managerial role is still looked at through a male lens. This is also encapsulated by Virginia Shine's Think Manager, Think Male and the phenomenon of sex typing. We see now that managers and women are beginning to see management as something for women as well as men. This wasn't previously true. However, men on the whole still see management as something that is male. So the survey respondents were asked to list qualities that they thought were essential for good management. And they had a lot of ideas, but a few came out as most important. These are the ones that were listed more than 4 times. Empathy was a key feature for a lot of people. It was listed by 16 out of the 52 respondents. What about qualities that the survey respondents saw in managers that had negative effects? So there's even less of a consensus here. But when you narrow it down to the responses that had 3 or more respondents say them, arrogance, dominance, and ego seem to come out on top. These are traits which are historically associated with patriarchal masculinity. So, aiming to get to the root of the issue, 2 ideas are identified. Is this the way people are supposed to manage, and is this what managers are like as people? This is the 2 possible options, or it could be both. In fact, it turns out that it is both. So, management theory throughout the 20th century has tended to neglect gender issues, and this means that we have to look back to the birth of modern management, which is scientific management. It's based on efficiency and assembly line manufacturing. The idea is that the managers plan and the workers do. It removes all possible brain work from the shop floor. So this is the first time kind of decision making was really taken away from subordinates and on a large scale and put with managers. The idea was that it fostered efficiency, but it has got its criticisms. People say that it treats employees like machines, objects, or pieces of equipment. They really don't humanize. It doesn't humanize employees, and it sees employees as perhaps expendable. It also opens the door to bullying. And Devi Akella in 2016 highlighted that bullying is often used as a style of supervision where if a manager cannot reliably get an employee to work, they will bully them in order to get the results that they're asking for. And scientific management is at its core about results rather than people. So looking further at what management is supposed to be, what people consider management to be, we looked at the 50 best-selling management books of all time. 39 had applicable content to people management. 13 of these had key points implying that empathy was important in management. These are the orange books. Only 7 of those actually made direct mention of empathy, and the mention or implication of empathy was not more likely in newer books, which is an indication that mainstream management theory still has some way to go in promoting empathy, given that it's ranked as so important by the survey respondents. 14 of the management book of the 39 said hierarchy was I put forward the idea of a non-traditional hierarchy. This is encouraging, and it was more likely to be mentioned in newer books. However, the most starkly depressing statistic is that 37 of the 39 were written by men alone. So we can conclude that what management is supposed to be is still largely controlled by men, and patriarchal leadership is very much in the mainstream. So let's look at what is a typical manager like. So we can look at their personality type, and this is the Myers-Briggs personality type, which is commonly used in organizational settings. It's organized around 4 binary preferences, but the key one to look at here are decisions and lifestyles. So making decisions with thinking and using judging in your lifestyle are more common in managers. Lifestyle does not have as pronounced gender implications as decisions. Decisions is the one that decisions 56.5% of men are thinking, and only 24.5% of women. So it's expected that if most managers are men, then quite a few people would be thinking. However, even female managers are mostly thinking. So there's this large bias toward thinking in management. This has been argued to be because the logical decision-making of thinking leads to the best outcomes. However, it could also be to do with gender bias. Perhaps women and men have to be of a more traditionally masculine personality to get ahead. It could also be that the roles and responsibilities of manager have formed around masculinity, and thus the expectations of the role reflect this. So the expectations of a manager would be that they would be this thinking person, and that's why you have more thinking managers. The thinking side of the decision part does echo the principles of scientific management quite a lot, so this would not be surprising. Now let's look through another lens, alpha male leaders. So they're a personality type, and they're powerful, authoritative, and at their best they're inspiring. So these are positive traits. The negative traits, there are perhaps more. There are a lot of issues. They can cause a lot of issues. And to highlight some key points, especially as managers, they create resistance, resentment, and revenge. And alpha managers can demoralize their staff with autocratic, abusive, or micromanaging tactics, all of which are associated with patriarchal leadership. So it is said that we need alphas. Their positives are very valuable to an organization. But if you think about this case, dysfunctional alphas can actually push their organizations to the point where they're willing to hire management consultants sooner than let the issue go any further. The costs to the organization prior to this must have already been high. There are a lot of hidden costs of demotivated, upset employees, and now, the organization is having to spend money on getting in management consultants to deal with the issue. So they represent 70% of all senior executives, so there's a lot of them. They have very little curiosity about people or feelings. Although there are some female alphas, the majority of women do tend to place more value on interpersonal relationships and pay closer attention to people's feelings. This means that the vast majority of alpha leaders are men. So let's look at the recommendations based on this analysis. It's clear that we need to create environments where patriarchal leadership is minimized. We can't just encourage managers to change their behavior because the nature of the management role, as discussed in the analysis, means that the patriarchal behavior will be encouraged. Rather, for a long-term solution, it's necessary that the change happens on a deeper level. So 3 solutions are proposed, all are aimed at organizational levels. This suggests that the research might have little immediate impact. However, it's hoped that this will encourage and stimulate further thought in the area. So the first is around removing hierarchies. Flat and dynamic hierarchies are a current trend and have the advantage that there's not as much of a power imbalance as in a traditional hierarchy. This has the potential to remove some of the key factors that enable patriarchal management by distributing decision-making and accountability. What about a change in the nature of management? Organizations could change the roles and responsibilities of a management role to make it more about support and less about decision-making. This would take us further from scientific management and take us back more to a kind of a more human management. Hiring and recruitment is another area in which change can be made. The skills that are devalued by patriarchal managers have a place in effective leadership. Hiring practice has been shown to have an effect on organizational culture in certain charities in the UK, and certain skills such as emotional intelligence have been highlighted as essential for the near future by the World Economic Forum. So you could hire for these skills. You could also hire for gender, try and increase the gender diversity within management because women are less likely to have patriarchally masculine traits. One method of doing this would be a variant of the Rooney Rule that L&Q Housing Association is implementing to create diversity, which here could be implemented as for every management role advertised for, invite at least one female applicant to interview. So let's evaluate each of these, the advantages and disadvantages. Removing hierarchies has the advantage that flat organizations are more agile, and this enables further change more easily and reduces overheads in the long term. So it's cheaper potentially in the long term. However, the disadvantages are that it's immediately very expensive to implement, and you would still have the remaining senior managers. So if these are patriarchal or alpha male leaders, then it would be quite hard to solve the problem just based on this. change in the nature of management has the advantages that it's free to adapt to fit organizational needs because it's quite loose. You can shape this role around what you need, and it will promote skills that are lacking in the world of employment today. It's also transformative. It really would change the nature of the organization. The disadvantages is that there's very little precedent for this. It's been done on an individual level, but on a organizational level, it's hard to see such a huge change that has happened. It's also difficult to embed. People might just go back to their long-standing expectations of management. Finally, it's transformative. You don't know what's going to come out at the end. You might lose things that you value. Finally, changing recruitment practices. It has the advantages that it's easy to implement, but it's not as sure to be effective, and it's slower. It requires also a willingness to learn on the part of other managers so that the skills and aptitudes brought by the new managers can spread. In terms of feasibility, removing hierarchies, it requires a lot of patience, thought, and resources. Best practice and literature around flat hierarchies suggests that it's not without its challenges, so it's therefore recommended that newly formed organizations look to implement this with care, looking to comparable organizations and other resources for guidance. These kinds of changes are much easier for smaller organizations, but there are several examples of organizations of a larger size who are flat, such as Tesla and Reactor. In consulting stakeholders, one previous employee of a flat organization emphasized the value of dynamic hierarchy, where different staff would lead on different projects as appropriate. This still runs the risk of some of the pitfalls of patriarchal management, however, is a much more realistic option for a lot of organizations than going completely flat. And looking at so that's the feasibility of removing hierarchies. Changing the nature of management. On an individual level, we said it's very feasible. Simon Sinek sees management to be more about little to do with being in charge, while Elizabeth Baskin focuses on relationships and intuition. The CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, who has seen Microsoft shares rise to an all-time high, wrote that his passion is to put empathy at the center of everything he pursues. However, the changing the nature of management on an organizational level would require huge patience, thought, and resources because it is a huge change. It was raised in consultations that the efficiency of scientific management and its descendants could be lost with this kind of approach. However, it should be highlighted that encouraging employees to follow best practice and optimal process is not incompatible with empathy and support. But in implementing this kind of recommendation, it's certainly key that optimal process should be upheld. In terms of hiring and recruitment practices, these are on the whole quite feasible. It's cheap. Difficulties might be around cultural differences between the new and old managers. And one thing that was raised in the discussions with stakeholders was that the best candidate might be someone who doesn't have so much emotional intelligence. However, it's highlighted that emotional intelligence is key for any management role, and it should be upheld as a strength. Of course, you should still take the best candidate, but emotional intelligence should definitely factor into this. So, removing hierarchies, it's an organizational redesign. It's a large commitment and requires universal involvement. Everyone needs to be on board and invest in development time of communication, listening, and facilitation skills to enable the change. The process needs to be defined so otherwise informal hierarchies will arise. So it should be done over around 2 years, but there should be patience. The amount of time allocated needs to be flexible in case of setbacks. In implementing the changing nature of management, all staff needs to be truly committed. A universally shared goal should be identified over the first year, and over the second year, this goal should be implemented. A change management model such as the McKinsey 7S should be implemented, and maximal staff involvement should happen. This is not suitable for a top-down change. This should be a process of application where all staff are involved as much as possible. If all staff are not committed, this should be abandoned or postponed because it's really a very difficult change to implement. It's a significant time investment for all staff. Finally, In hiring and recruitment practices, emotional intelligence should be assessed, and equal numbers of feeling and thinking and personality should be invited to interview. This is mainly on the part of HR and all. And yeah, thank you.